The biggest challenge that I see is that they're lonely, high achievers, hard workers, strivers, leaders. They're the loneliest people I've ever met.
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt.
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
And you're listening to The Double Win Show. We're excited today to bring to you our interview with Arthur Brooks. Now, the truth is, both of us have been super fans of his.
We've been super fans. And guys, I got to tell you something. Of all the interviews, I got COVID when this interview was scheduled, and Arthur has a very full schedule, as you might imagine. I mean, he travels around and speaks all the time, so he couldn't move it. And you had to do it without me, and I was so sad. I was like, this is the interview I've been waiting for.
I was a little bit nervous about it because I thought, Megan asked such great questions. I don't know if I can carry it for the whole hour, but man, it was so easy. Because he's just easy to relate to.
Well, I think that his work has been so meaningful to us both. His book, Build the Life You Want, that he wrote with Oprah, and his book, From Strength to Strength. Both of those have been very important books in our lives. And we have so much respect for Arthur and the quality of his work and his research. It's so applicable.
It is. And I first discovered him after I'd had my heart attack. I was on medical leave, and somebody recommended From Strength to Strength, which is a book about kind of what you need to be focused on in the second half of life.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of books written on that, but his was so unique and so powerful. But then I started looking into his biography, and this is amazing. He's a Harvard professor teaching leadership and, get this, happiness at the Kennedy School and the Business School at Harvard. He's the author of 13 books, including Build the Life You Want, as Megan mentioned, and From Strength to Strength. He's a former president of the American Enterprise Institute, which is kind of interesting. He's a columnist at The Atlantic, writes a great column called How to Build a Life, and he hosts a podcast called How to Build a Happy Life. Now, one of the things he told me is that his class at Harvard on happiness is like 4 times oversubscribed.
That makes like airline overbooking seem like nothing.
There's like too many people that want to get into it.
Yeah.
And you're going to discover why as we go through this conversation. I had the privilege of speaking with him at an event in Phoenix earlier this year. And so we got to meet face to face, and he was as delightful in person as he is on stage or in his writing.
I think you guys are going to really love this conversation because it's going to be so helpful as you're pursuing the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life. So let's get to the conversation with Arthur Brooks.
Arthur, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Nice to be with you.
Great to have you on. I've been looking forward to this for many months now.
Yeah.
I want to start kind of at the top. And, one of the things that I didn't mention in the introduction is that I got introduced to your work about 2 years ago when I had a mild heart attack and then bypass surgery. And so somebody recommended to me From Strength to Strength. And that book, I took 3 months leave from work, which was great, just medical recovery. And I read that book, and it really reframed everything for my life. So thank you for that important work.
Thanks for telling me that, Michael. I wrote it for you and for me.
I did feel like you wrote it for me. What got you interested in happiness as a field of study?
So my academic background is in behavioral science. I've done a lot of different things with my career. I was actually a classical musician to start off my life. From when I was 19, I went professional as a French horn player. Spent a lot of my 20s in the Barcelona Symphony, as a matter of fact, and then actually went to college in my late 20s by correspondence. By that time, I didn't have a preconceived notion of, who I was anymore academically. I mean, most people go to college and they think they know what they want to study, and it turns out it was something else, et cetera. Well, I didn't have that problem because I was 28 or 29. And so I just looked at a bunch of different things that might be interesting. And it turned out that behavioral science was what I was really keen on. So much so that when I finally finished my bachelor's degree, I quit music and went to graduate school, got my PhD, and then became an academic for 10 years, then ran a think tank for a behavioral science think tank for 10 years, and then came back to academia. And during that time, I got really passionate about the things that make people tick, that the things they want the most. And I was most interested in why people don't do what they need to do to get what they most want. These are the mysteries of life. And that really led me to this whole understanding of happiness. Everybody wants to be happier, but most people are not doing what they need to do to be happier. Why is that? Why do we make these mistakes? Why are we sold all this snake oil? What can we do to actually be better? And so little by little by little, over the past 30 years, I've refined my focus more and more to be about the science of happiness. And about 3 years ago, I started a company while teaching. I continued to be a professor at Harvard, dedicated entirely to lifting up as many millions of people as I can using science and ideas.
Man, I love that. How in the world did you talk Harvard into letting you teach a course on happiness?
Harvard's a wonderful place. It's huge. And it has everybody doing everything in the world. And their strategy is basically go find interesting people and let them do what they want. That's the Harvard strategy, which is one of the reasons. I mean, it's great to be Harvard. You have to have a lot of money to be able to do that. But it's a great strategy for bringing out creativity and passion in the people who are doing what they do. So when I came to at the Harvard Business School of all places, the dean said, "So glad you're here. What do you want to do?" And I said, "I've been looking at the data on the graduates, HBS graduates, and they're 15 years out and they got everything they thought they wanted. And it turned out that they had the wrong dreams for their happiness and they're not happy. We need a class in the MBA curriculum on how leaders can be happier. Let's call it leadership and happiness. A science class. I mean, not a woo-woo class, not a self-empowerment class, no, science class on neuroscience and social science. And with really practical tools for business leaders." And the dean's like, "Yeah, dude, sounds awesome. Have fun." And it was born.
When we were in Scottsdale together, both of us spoke out there at an event, and you mentioned in your keynote that class, I think for this fall, was like, I don't know, several times oversubscribed.
Yeah. I have 180 students enrolled. I usually have about 400 on the waiting list. And there's an illegal Zoom link they think I'm not aware of.
That's amazing. Okay, another question about happiness. Is happiness a relatively new idea?
It isn't. It's an ancient idea. What's happened is our understanding of it has changed over the centuries. So if you go back, you find that Aristotle talking at length about happiness, by which he called happiness eudaimonia, which is an ancient Greek concept that's hard to translate. It kind of means a good life well lived. And so it had very little to do with feelings. And then over the centuries, it's become more and more about actually how we feel about things. And its greatest expression of happiness as a feeling is what we see in America today, which is a big wrong turn. Over the past 35 years, scholars, neuroscientists, and social scientists like me have started looking at the science of happiness a lot more rigorously to define what it is, how you can get more of it, how you can teach it, and what the big mistakes are in pursuing it.
So what did the ancients get right? And then based on the science, what did they get wrong? How has our understanding of it changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, the ancients got a lot right that we forgot. To begin with, Aristotle, he didn't have any time for your feelings. And part of the reason is because he understood that feelings are transient, and he had a concept that feelings, aka emotions, are signals about the outside world. And that turns out to be neuroscientifically exactly correct. You know, when we talk about good and bad feelings, that's a mistake. There are no good feelings, there are no bad feelings. There's positive and negative emotions because that's information for you about whether or not something's a threat or an opportunity around you. And that's all it is what it comes down to. What you need to do to be a happier person is understand your emotions and learn how to manage them without trying to eradicate or medicalize or pathologize your emotions. That's necessarily, I mean, there's some people for whom it is a medical problem, but way, way fewer than what we talk about today. And that's exactly how Aristotle more or less talked about it in pre-scientific times. You know, he said, you know, figure out the best life, figure out the best habits. Notwithstanding your feelings, follow the rules is kind of what he talked about. And that's ultimately, that's a lot of how I teach about happiness still today.
You know, I know in the Bible, I don't remember the word happiness being used, but the word joy, maybe a translation problem. But is there a difference between joy and happiness?
Well, there is, and it's an important question that you're raising, because you and I, as Christian people, we were raised in an environment where joy, it had a particular theological significance, which is very different than the way that psychologists use happiness. One of the reasons I don't talk about joy very much is because as a scientist, it means something different to me than it does to me as a Christian. So when scientists talk about joy, that's a basic positive emotion that's largely implicated in a whole bunch of biochemistry, including the anticipation of reward with dopamine and the stimulation of different parts of the limbic system of the brain, like the ventral tegmental area, that give you a sense of ebullience. That's a great thing. She says that she loves me, or I just had 3 lines of cocaine or something. It's the same thing. It gives you that particular transient feeling of good. Is the way that works, right? And sometimes very destructive things like drugs, and sometimes really wonderful things like I love you. Now that's different than how Christians talk about joy, as in, the famous autobiography of C.S. Lewis is Surprised by Joy. And what he meant by joy is those moments when you get a glimpse of the beatific vision. Now, I use that word on purpose. So I'm a Catholic, and the beatific vision for us, which is not as common for evangelicals and Protestant Christians, that's the beatific vision is the face of God. And you're not going to get it till you're in heaven. And you're going to lay your gaze on the face of God, and it's all going to make sense. And it's going to be unremitting joy now and forever. That's what C.S. Lewis meant. Now, why is it called beatific? Because the Beatitudes are happiness. That's another way to translate the Beatitudes. That is to say, blessed are they who, another way to say that is happy are they who, because the Beatitudes are happiness lessons in the Bible. That's another way of actually translating what the Beatitudes mean and what the words mean.
I think I mentioned to you when we were together, I'm Eastern Orthodox, and we have a little bit of a different view. It's the vision of the uncreated light. So it's also related to joy, and very few people ever experience it.
Yeah, so so when you ask a psychologist what's joy, they'll say joy is a basic positive emotion that you have because you have an approach motive that's being ascertained by your limbic system, and that has to give you an incentive to go do that thing and eat that banana or get that mate. Like, okay. And Christians say it's a glimpse of the face of God. And so you don't want to mix those two things up.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It seems like there's a lot of emphasis on happiness. And, frankly, you've popularized it a lot, and there's some other people writing about it. But why is it that people seem so profoundly unhappy, at least in the U.S.? I went to Ethiopia about 15 years ago. My wife and I were over there with World Vision for a couple of weeks. And these people had nothing. Yeah. And yet they seem to us to be profoundly happy.
Yeah.
And here we came back to the U.S. and, it's like we've never had more in life, but everybody seems out of sorts and over-medicated and all the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. So what gives, right? Well, the truth is that there's a dislocation between what we think will bring us happiness and what actually brings us happiness. What we think will bring us happiness, because our animal nature tells us it is so. Mother Nature lies. She lies all the time because Mother Nature just wants you to survive and pass on your genes. She doesn't care if you're happy. So she says your goal in life is money, power, pleasure, and fame. Basically, there's the things that make you give you greater evolutionary fitness. Right? You do that stuff, man, life is going to be so sweet. So if I have more cars than I need, it indicates to potential mates that I have excess resources. And so therefore that 4th car is going to bring me happiness. That's a complete cross circuit in your brain that's doing all of these calculations, and they're wrong. Now, when you're in a very rich society, you can do all that stuff. You can pursue all that stuff very, very efficiently and then be weirded out by the fact that you're not getting happier. Well, there's a reason. I just explained the basic evolutionary biology for why you'd think that and why it doesn't work. What does bring happiness are not, money, power, pleasure, and fame. It's faith, family, friends, and work that serves. And there's a ton of scientific literature behind this. This is not philosophy. This is social science and neuroscience that shows that when you have a sense of the transcendent, when you have deep family relationships where you know your people and they know you, when you have real friendships, and when you have work that serves others as opposed to serving yourself, that's when you're going to be happier. And it turns out that you don't need to be in a rich society to do that. You don't need to. And as a matter of fact, when you don't have as many opportunities for those worldly idols, you might just be happier under certain circumstances. Now, that said, this is not an argument to turn the United States into a developing nation. I mean, we're pretty good at doing that by screwing up our public policies and kind of going in reverse as far as I'm concerned, but that's another podcast. Well, we need a flourishing, entrepreneurial, upwardly mobile, progressive economy, economically progressive economy. But we need not to be idolized, to be idolatrous about the fruits of what that prosperity can bring. And that's one of the reasons that the happiest people you're going to find are not the American materialists, and they're not necessarily the Ethiopians that you met. They're the people in the United States listening to you that are your fans, who have the opportunities to get ahead, to create jobs and opportunity and growth and excitement, and to be able to feed their kids, and to be able to educate other people, and to be able to give to charity, and they're taking care of their families, and they have close friendships, and they're living to serve, and they're on their knees in communion with the divine. That's the best life.
Can we unpack each of those four? Because these are like the pillars of what you teach, this faith, family, friends, and work. But I'd love to hear kind of the science that supports that, because I think sometimes we think when it comes to faith, it's okay if you don't, it's okay if you do, doesn't really matter. But what's the science say?
Yeah, the science is really clear on this. And so, the shorthand is faith, family, friends, and work. But obviously it's a lot more complex than that. By faith, I don't mean my faith. I'm a Catholic. You're Orthodox. A lot of your listeners are evangelicals. There are a lot of people listening to you who are of no faith. Now, as a Christian, I have my views. As a scientist, what I will tell you is what brings the level of human flourishing that we're talking about here is something that makes you small and makes the universe large. Now, here's basically what I mean. You will not be happy when you are the star of your own psychodrama. And once again, Mother Nature insists that that Michael Hyatt's life should focus on nothing more than Michael Hyatt, starring Michael Hyatt, written by Michael Hyatt, right? Produced and directed by Michael Hyatt. That's the formula that Mother Nature is giving you, but that's the formula for misery. That's a good formula for you meeting your needs and passing on your genes. It's a horrible formula for your happiness because it's boring, it's terrifying, it's tedious. What you need to do is to get small and make the universe large. So how are you going to do that? And the answer is your faith or your life philosophy. You need a strategy that makes you little, despite the fact that your tendency is to be the star. And that's what faith does more efficiently than any other approach. But look, if studying the Stoic philosophers and living according to their dictates with the utmost seriousness, if that works for you, good, do that. If an Eastern meditation practice works for you, that's good too. I like to go to Mass every day. That works for me.
Mm-hmm. So is there science that says that people who are of some kind of faith self-report more happiness than people who don't have a faith?
Tons of experiments, tons of data, and there's even neuroscience data that explains why that is the case. Really the greatest scholar in the world doing work on this right now is Lisa Miller, who teaches at Columbia University. She does the neuroscience and social science of religious experiences, and what her work shows, using cutting edge technology at this point, is that religious experiences give you access to brain regions and knowledge that you can't get any other way. And so this is one of the reasons that people who are serious about their faith, they have a much greater sense of the meaning of their life, because it's hard to figure out the meaning of your life without access to these brain regions, quite frankly. And actually, we kind of know what this is. The technological world is actually throwing you onto the left hemisphere of your brain, which is the hemisphere of the brain most dedicated to technology and analysis and facts and distraction. The right side of your brain is where all the meaning questions are. And we're distracted from that. We're having a hard time accessing that part of our brain, which is one of the reasons that people feel that their lives are so meaningless in the current environment and so unhappy. When you have religious experiences, you're on the right side of your brain. Religious experiences put you in the place in your brain where you need to be able to consider questions of meaning.
You know, I want to save most of this for later. I want to talk about practical strategies a little bit later.
Right.
But it seems like what comes up for me when you say that is that there are those right side of the brain things that we can access if we just turn off the technology long enough to do it, whether it's painting or cooking or whatever. Would you agree? I mean, are those things that are helpful?
Yeah, they are. Although you have to be serious about it is the way that this works. And so people will say, yeah, I'm going to cook right now. And then they look at their phone every 5 minutes while they're cooking, right? Or they'll fritter away their time. I mean, is the structures of the brain called the default mode network. That's where daydreaming and boredom comes in. You need to find meaning, you need to have the default mode network. And if every time you're unoccupied, you're actually looking at your device, you're precluding your ability to actually to access the parts of the brain that you need to be able to find meaning for long enough periods of time that it makes sense.
Man, that explains a lot. So here's a question too. Why, given where technology's at and with the rise of AI and the future of us all becoming cyborgs or something, what does that mean for happiness? I mean, are we going to ever get into a balanced relationship with technology? Are you hopeful or discouraged?
Yeah, I'm both, actually, Michael. That's a good question. And part of the reason I'm discouraged is because the technologies that we're rolling out are complicated technologies, which is to say that they are solving enormously difficult problems on static objects. The questions that we have are complex problems and complex questions, which is to say that they're simple, but they're impossible to solve. You can only live them. So I'll give you an example. A complex problem is a football game. The complicated solution is a computer simulation of the football game, which is always inaccurate, totally inadequate, and not satisfying or fun. The point is the complexity. So love is complex, faith is complex, meaning is complex. Those are complex things, which means that you can't find the solution. You have to live the solution in real time is the way that works. Technology is promising us solutions to our complex problems, and they never deliver. Social media was the complicated solution to the complex problem of loneliness, and it made loneliness worse. Dating apps are the complicated solution to not being able to find adequate mates, and it made the problem worse. People are less likely to find dates that they find satisfying. They're less likely to find the permanent partnerships that they seek with dating apps. We know this is true. But it's not because dating apps are evil. It's because they're the wrong technology matched up with the wrong part of the brain is what we're talking about here. So I'm discouraged about that. What am I encouraged by? That people are figuring it out. And that people are saying enough. So my kids have left social media behind. My young adult children are like, this is boring. I don't like this. And instead they did old fashioned stuff. I mean, my older sons got married at 22 and 23 and immediately started having kids. It's like 1940 around my house, man. What? But the reason is not because I said, no, wag my finger, Dad, the professor, said that I'm on the wrong hemisphere of my brain. Is because they figured it out on their own that it didn't make them happy. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to the time where people use technology for what it's supposed to be used for and not for what it's not supposed to be used for, which is the complex, beautiful, love-filled parts of our lives that we have to live in real time.
The thing that discourages me from it, and I'm optimistic in many ways too, and I love technology, but it seems like there's been enormous amount of money and research developed in how to hijack the dopamine producing parts of our brain. And so that it's really hard to break free from the gravitational pull of these devices today. Yeah. How do you do it?
Well, you have to understand what is actually going on, because knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. A lot of people don't know that they're literally addicted to their devices. They have no idea how many times a day that they look at their phones, for example, which is 250 times a day or something absurd like that. They're not aware that the first thing they do every single morning is actually look at these devices. And when you have an awareness of this, then you can actually break free. You should not, and so you can set up a series of protocols. I don't sleep in the same room as my phone. because I don't want to look at it when I wake up in the middle of the night. There's nothing to look at. All it's going to do is wake me up, is the way that works. And God knows I have trouble enough sleeping to begin with. I don't have to go into church with my phone. There's all kinds of spaces in my life where my phone doesn't actually have to play a role. And the more that I realize that and start to practice purposively, an awake use of technology in my life, the more that I realize I need it less than I thought I needed it, is the way that works. The same thing, by the way, is just paying attention to any of your activities that have become monotonic, automatic. Now, sometimes you have such a you can have such a full-blown addiction that you have to take special measures of going on a dopamine fast, which is another word for Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about family. And I'm thinking of the context today where it just seems like families are disintegrating. People are putting off parenting longer and longer. People are getting married later. A lot of people aren't even getting married. A lot of people don't want to have kids. You've got a population or a depopulation problem in many countries. China's probably the worst, but it's even happening here. We're seeing declining birth rates. So let's just talk about the importance of family. What do you see there, and how is it related to our happiness?
The family relationships are directly neurophysiologically related to our happiness vis-a-vis a neuropeptide in the brain called oxytocin. Most people know what oxytocin is. It's also known as the love molecule. And what it's a bonding agent between the human beings. We are a kin-based, hierarchical, tropical species, we Homo sapiens. And, over the course of human life, we've evolved to have certain physiological properties that will help keep us alive. One of which is the desire to be together with our people. Now, again, I'm a follower of the gospel and cross of Jesus Christ. I believe that everybody's my people. I believe that we are all one human family, that we are all brothers and sisters made divinely with no exceptions. I believe that. But I also understand that I have a certain physiological union with people with whom I'm related. Either I've adopted, like the case of my adopted daughter and my wife that I married, or the people that are physiologically related to me or genetically related to me. And how actually do I experience that? I experience that through this neuropeptide that functions as a hormone in the brain called oxytocin, meaning that when I have more contact with them, it's like 4th of July. When your babies are born, and you remember this, Michael, when your first child was born, you lay eyes on your first child, you're like, I would die for this baby. I don't know why. It's crazy. It's like magic. There's a physiological explanation for this. Evolutionary biologists say that's so you don't leave the baby on the bus or something. But the truth is, I believe it's a gift from God that we actually have this unique and especially magical set of relationships with those particular people. And if you don't actually exploit that, if you don't have that, you're not going to be as happy as you could be, as you should be, as you deserve to be. That's one of the reasons that it saddens me, it distresses me so much that 1 in 6 Americans is not talking to a family member today because of politics. That's nuts. That is completely crazy. You're basically handing over your oxytocin and your happiness to some stupid political party or talking head on TV. Don't be an idiot. Don't fall for their snake oil, man. They want you to not talk to Aunt Marge because she votes for Trump or doesn't vote for Trump or whatever, right? Don't be an idiot. Your love should absolutely transcend ideological differences. And the whole line of argumentation that I hear today constantly, which is somebody who disagrees with me politically is denying my right to exist. That is complete nonsense. That is idiotic nonsense that somebody has tried to sell to you so that you will do their activist bidding. They don't care if you're unhappy. They just want power is the way that works out. Don't fall for it. We all need oxytocin because we all deserve more love. And that's a unique bond of love that comes through the family.
It seems like in today's modern world, there's not the biological impetus or imperative to have large families, right? I mean, it's not like we're living back on the farm and we need the labor. Right. And so like I have 5 kids, and I remember when we had 5 kids, people were like, what are you thinking?
Right.
And it's unusual today, but why? What can you do to fix that so that people get more enamored with family and we can kind of get back to more of these notions of family and connection.
Yeah. So it's absolutely true that the environmental incentives have changed, by which I mean that, you find huge families when there's a lot of child mortality, when the tendency is for some of your kids to die, you're going to have more kids. And when you actually use kids as labor because of a family operation, like a family farm, absolutely, people are going to have a lot more kids. And when those two things go away, by the way, one more circumstance, when kids grow up and take care of their aging parents. And so if you take in, really good medicine, which I'm glad about, a social security system, which I'm glad about, and the fact that we don't need our kids for child labor, which I'm kind of glad about, then you're going to have fewer kids. Then the people who are going to have lots of kids is because they belong to religious groups like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormons, or to a certain extent, really traditional Catholics and Orthodox Christian communities are going to see a lot more kids. But that's because, once again, they have a different set of incentives to do that. What do we need as a country? And this is a big question that a lot of people, politicians, including politicians, are engaged in these days. Some will say, well, we need a big child tax credit, right? So you need a big incentive to make that possible. Some countries where it's absolutely disastrous, like Hungary, has traditionally had the lowest birth rate, way below replacement levels all across Europe. And so the current leader of Hungary put in place a policy where if you have one kid, you get a permanent 25% exemption from taxation for the rest of your life. If you have 4 kids, you have 100%. You don't pay any taxes again for the rest of your life. I mean, that's a policy with teeth. But the truth is, you need to change culture, and you need a culture that says that kids are awesome. That's what you need. And there are cultures that do that. The reason that Catholics continue to have a lot of kids, and the reason that my kids, I have 3, but my kids all say they want to have 6. And again, they were born around the year 2000. I was born in the mid-1960s. We're going in reverse in my home. Why? Because they're in a different culture than I was in. I was in a very modernist kind of 1980s, 1990s culture that said kids are a luxury item. And my kids grew up, and they're more traditionally religious than the way I grew up, and they're more traditionally, their morals are more traditionally than mine. I mean, kids these days, right? They got to rebel in some way. And they're like, all their friends are going to have tons of kids, and they want to have tons of kids, and babies are a blessing, is the way they talked about it. And that's what we need. That's what we need to proliferate if we want to have more kids. Because no joke, for the longest time, we labored under a complete misapprehension, an utter lie, that we have a population explosion that's going to deplete all the resources and ruin the earth. That is wrong. That is straight up wrong. Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb has been completely debunked again and again and again. And the biggest threat to the prosperity of your grandchildren and great-grandchildren is population decline.
That's right.
That is the biggest threat that they face. We need more babies. That doesn't mean we need to, misuse resources. We should be good and proper stewards of the resources, but we know how to do that too. And what we need is babies, 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 babies. And the only way to do that is for us to start trying to change the culture in positive ways, not just in religious communities.
Well, I don't want to get into this too much, but all this has an economic impact, but I also think it has a role in foreign relations or international law. If you have, for example, China with its population, I don't know what you call it, deflation, they're just losing people like crazy.
The population is imploding.
And those people get desperate. And that there's a reason to become, all of a sudden, if you don't have enough population, you get very aggressive with other countries that are your neighbors, because you got to have some mechanism for, satisfying the labor and the needs of the people you do have.
For sure. I mean, there's just nothing good that comes when a population is in decline. You have to be so radical to be wanting to decrease the population. You got to be Ebenezer Scrooge, man, or some weird activist version of that for the 21st century to want to do this. It's just not a loving point of view, but it's also an impractical point of view in so many ways. Economic growth is the rate of productivity times the rate of population. That's the economic growth rate in every country. So if you lower productivity or you lower the population growth rate, you're going to get less economic growth. And when you do that, you're going to have more competition for resources. You're going to have more conflict. You're going to have more war. You're going to have more violence. That's just the way it's going to be.
Okay, well, on that happy note, let's move to friendships.
friendship is something I do an awful lot with because I work, you said that you read From Strength to Strength when you had a health challenge. I wrote it for you, but I really mean that. I wrote that book for the highest achieving strivers that are seeing change in their lives. So if I could have, written the introduction about Michael Hyatt reading this book, I would have, except that the book hadn't been written yet. So you're exactly the demographic of somebody I wanted to write that book for. No joke. I talk to very successful people in the second half of life all the time. And there's so much going right, but there's also a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge that I see is that they're lonely. High achievers, hard workers, strivers, leaders, they're the loneliest people I've ever met. It's weird. It's like, how's that possible? I mean, you're surrounded by people all day long. And the answer is it's simple. They have lots of deal friends and no real friends. That's what the people listening to, the double win. That's the reason the double win. The single win is you're successful in your job. Congratulations.
Yeah.
The double win is actually having love in your life and success in your job. And the love in your life is more important than success in your job. And if you don't have real friends, which is to say, those that are not using you and you're not using them. I don't mean using I'm not casting aspersions. It's just that you don't need them to get ahead and they don't need you for their own personal prosperity. You need people who are useless, frankly, to be a happy person. Those are real friends. And that's why I write a lot and coach a lot and talk an awful lot about how to have real friends for people who haven't done it maybe since college.
I love the distinction between real friends and deal friends because I think it's easy as a high achieving executive to get confused by this.
Yeah.
I used to be the CEO of a public company and I had 17 years, had very close relationships with the people at work.
Yeah.
I saw them every day. We often went to lunch. We did a lot of things together. But then when I stepped down from that, we sold our company to HarperCollins. But when I stepped down from that, those people didn't call. And I didn't call them. And it was no malice on anybody's part. But we just didn't have the convenience of proximity.
Yeah.
So would you categorize those as deal friends? Or were they...
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with deal friends. We're always going to have deal friends. You just can't have only deal friends if you want to be a happy person. So Aristotle, back to the ancient Greeks, was great on this. He talked about friendship being in sort of, there's three levels. At the lowest levels, he called these friendships of transaction, or they were telic, as in the have a telos. Mm-hmm. In ancient Greek, that means a goal of the friendship. And that's fine. I mean, that your colleagues and your distributors and your subcontractors, and they were your friends. They really were. But, when you left the company or they left the company or something, there was nothing to talk about. You didn't know their kids' names. You didn't know their birthdays, except maybe transiently. And those are transactional friendships. And one level above that for Aristotle was friendships of beauty. They're based on admiration. And those are good, right? But they tend to be one-sided as well. And if the object of admiration goes away, so does a friendship. The sense of humor, the success that you admire about somebody else, their beauty, whatever. At the highest level is what he called the perfect friendship, the friendship of virtue. That's the atelic. That's the useless friendship. They just love you. And what successful people all have in common is they don't have time for that, because that takes time. Your useless friends, you got to call them every week or they're not friends. They're not real friends. And there's nothing to talk about that's going to be a good use of your time financially. I mean, you can find something to do together in a deal. I mean, my best bud, he's in Atlanta, and I sit on the board of his foundation, and he was on the board of my company when I was a CEO. But those are just a pretext for us to talk on the phone about, so how's your grandkids, right? And how's your faith life and all the stuff that real friends talk about with each other, right? And by the way, how are the Red Sox doing? Useless stuff in that way, not financially useful things. It takes time, and you have to take the time. Make the time is the point.
That's so good. Well, and I think to just be aware of the distinction and not be confused or to assume that the deal friends are real friends, and like you said, nothing wrong with that, but I need more real friends in my life if I'm going to be happy.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you don't need 100. You can't do 100. It's too time consuming.
Yeah.
You need somewhere between 2 and 5 real friends.
That's a good goal. Okay, let's talk about the workplace. And I got some specific questions about this, but talk about the role of meaningful work and significance as it relates to our happiness.
Yeah. So we have, we set up our business school students with goals that are the wrong goals for happiness. And our students, they meet their goals, their dreams come true, and then they find out that they had the wrong dreams. I mean, woe be unto you if your dreams come true, because if you have the wrong dreams, it's a big problem, is the way that this turns out. We tell our students, because Mother Nature tells us that money, power, pleasure, and fame are going to make you happy. And so if you can get more of those things, then happiness will come on its own. And that's completely wrong. What you need to do is you need to aim for happiness, and then you will be successful enough. Right now, that just the way I phrase that, every single striver listening to us right now, they have panic in their hearts. Because what do you mean successful enough? You mean I'm going to settle? and everybody knows that settling is no good, because it doesn't scratch what the striver needs for the sense of satisfaction. I get it. I completely get it, because I'm a striver too. I understand this. But the truth of the matter is that we have to understand that when it comes to work and real success, there's really 2 goals that will authentically, reliably bring joy from work. Those are the feeling that you're earning your success. So no joke, you can't feel, it's the reason that merit-based systems are so superior to tenure and loyalty-based systems. Mm-hmm. When I'm working with CEOs, I'm like, how do you reward people? And I know, man, I know all the signals. I wasn't born yesterday. I can tell when it's like you hang around here long enough, you're successful. That's a tenure-based system. That's the post office. Or if you kiss up to me enough, you'll be successful. Lots of companies work that way. But loyalty and tenure-based systems have horrible morale. The best morale comes when it's merit-based and when it's actually fairly administered. And the reason is because, especially if you're a nice person about it, that then people can earn their success. They feel like they're creating value with their lives and careers, and they're creating value in the lives of their clients and colleagues, that they're being rewarded and recognized for their personal merit, hard work, and responsibility. There's nothing that, look, I mean, you and I are Christian guys. We believe that earning your success is a reflection of being made in God's image. It really is. I mean, it's like, Adam and Eve, before the fall, they were working in the garden. Yep. It doesn't say in the book of Genesis that, before the fall, Adam and Eve were like lounging around in the garden. No, they were working the garden. That was paradise. They were earning their success. They were generative. They were creative. They were industrious, is the way that works. But if you don't know whether your rewards are actually coming from that or something else, then it becomes a huge problem. And so most CEOs that I talk to, they earn their success and they get tons of satisfaction from it. To be a good CEO, you have to make sure that you set up systems so the people who work for you are also earning their success. That's really, really critical. That turns out to be the magic ingredient for having a happier workplace. And the second part that brings joy to work is serving other people, believing that people need you. People need me. I am serving other people. I am focused on other people. That's the basis of human dignity. And a lot of people get a lot of their dignity from what they actually do at work every day. So great CEOs need to be able to tell their clients, somebody really, really needs you. I talked to a client yesterday and he was blown away by the quality of your work. That goes so far, or better yet, bring in the client to thank your employee. That is just, it works like magic.
So there's one question I've got to get to that before we get into our final round here, and that is the difference between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Because it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understood from strength to strength correctly, kind of your strategy has to change as you get older, or what you get satisfaction from.
That's right. So I write an awful lot about the neuroscience and social science of 2 kinds of intelligence. We think of intelligence as being just basically cognitive horsepower, IQ. That's not the most interesting aspect of it when it comes to the lives of everybody listening to us right now. The Raymond Cattell, the great British social psychologist in the 60s and 70s, wrote about the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence, which are the 2 different manifestations of your ability as you get older. The fluid intelligence, which happens earlier, is based on your working memory, your incredible energy and focus, and your innovative capacity. That's your ability to solve problems faster than others, pay attention, get stuff done, crack the case. Usually it's what every striver listening to us right now, that's the reason you got ahead when you were young. That's the reason that you got promoted before other people, that you got higher grades than other people, that you got bigger raises than other people. It's because you had higher fluid intelligence that you just then added, that you supercharged with your hard work and responsibility, that with it's just your horsepower, the sweat of your brow. That intelligence, that working memory and innovative capacity exists in every industry, particularly every industry where you use your brain. Like, I don't care if you're an air traffic controller or an opera composer, a financial advisor or a surgeon, same. That tends to peak when you're in your late 30s, which seems really early. It's like, wait a second. My intelligence is peaking in my late 30s? Well, yeah, actually. And nobody notices but you, but that's the reason that burnout tends to happen by people's mid 40s. The reason is because the only thing that gives us real satisfaction is progress. That's what we want. We're made for progress. You can be really good at what you do, but if you're not getting better, it's no good. It's no good. And if you really care an awful lot about your excellence and you're not making progress, it's very discouraging. And a lot of people can't quite put their finger on it, but they're like, I don't like my job as much as I did. A lot of dentists, a lot of doctors, and their mid 40s are like, man, I was passionate about this 10 years and I'm just not. I guess I'm bored. No. You're past your peak in fluid intelligence. And so therefore, you're not learning things as fast as you used to. Things are not as easy as they used to be. And that's really discouraging. Nobody else notices. If you're a dentist, you're not drilling the wrong tooth on somebody, but you notice. So that's the bad news. Now, the good news is there's a second kind of intelligence that comes in behind it. In your 40s and 50s and 60s, it gets higher and higher and higher. It stays high for the rest of your life in your 70s and 80s. That's crystallized intelligence. And that's very different. That's not based on working memory, which is worse. And everybody knows that. Your working memory is not as good when you get older. It's not based on innovative capacity. It's based on your ability to use everything that you see and hear and put it together into a coherent story. So here's really kind of how it works. You notice in your 50s that you have incredible pattern recognition. Everybody does. It's like, I've never seen this before, but I feel like I've seen it before. That's crystallized intelligence. Where you can be like, if you're a mechanic, for example, you've never seen a particular machine, but you know how to fix it. That's crystallized intelligence. When you're 20, you can't do it. When you're 50, you can, because crystallized intelligence is high. Pattern recognition, the ability to take disparate things and put them into new ideas, the ability to explain things, the ability to use metaphor, the ability to teach. That's crystallized intelligence. So what everybody needs to do is to get from the fluid intelligence curve, goes up and goes down, to the crystallized intelligence curve, which comes in behind it, goes up and stays high. You want to walk from one to the other. You want to go from your innovator curve to your instructor curve, from your star litigator curve to your managing partner curve. That's the goal. And everybody can do it in their own way in their own life. And if they do that, they'll get happier as they get older.
Well, it seems like a lot of people that are in that transition phase when they're going from the fluid intelligence to the crystallized intelligence, they desperately want to hang on to that fluid intelligence, and their self-worth begins. I've seen this with my coaching clients. Their self-worth begins to decline.
Yeah.
And they're not giving the same output that they used to give, but they're focused on the wrong thing, if I hear you correctly. Yeah,
they're ego driven. And what happens is that a lot of your sort of justification for living and sense of value creation comes from the fact that you're the star, you're the innovator, you're the ninja, the cowboy, the soul warrior, right? That's what people get really, really used to. And you need to turn into the coach. You need to go from being the star quarterback to finding the next star quarterback. And if you don't want to do that because you don't care about other people, that you really only care about yourself and that your own greatness, you're going to get, narcissism will get you stuck forever on your first curve. This is one of the reasons that people who are really self-absorbed, highly egotistical, that they struggle so much as they get older.
You may know him, Ian Cron, who does a lot of work with Enneagram. He wrote the road back to you. But he said to me at one point, he said, you've lived a highly fruitful life, but now your mission is transitioning. Now your mission is to grow fruit on other people's trees.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I literally wake up with that sense every day, that to measure my success by how successful I can make other people. I think that's why I like coaching as much as I do.
Yeah, you're in the perfect crystallized period of your life, and you're using it maximally, which is why you're happy. This is why you're really good at what you're doing, is because you've actually walked from, in your earlier CEO incarnation into a coaching incarnation. Most CEOs you can be a coaching CEO, that's great, but a lot who are just innovative CEOs are really fluid intelligence. And then if you can go into something, I left my CEO job and became a professor.
There you go.
And it's perfect. I used to write academic journal articles that were so mathematically sophisticated. I can't read them today, Michael. They're too technical. And I wrote them. I'm like, who wrote this? It was me when I was 35. Now I write about science, but I didn't do the science. I'm reading the academic articles and I'm translating it into the story of how non-scientists can use it. And I have an average weekly readership of about 500,000 people. That's way more impact than I could have had. But if I was continuing to try to do what I was 35, I wouldn't be as good at it. I wouldn't be as successful at it. And I wouldn't have an audience for it.
And you wouldn't be as happy, right?
Yeah, it's a total win-win if you're on the right curve. If you're on the right curve, you're going to have a win-win.
Well, we could talk for hours, but you don't have time and I don't have time, but I want to get to the lightning round.
Yeah.
This has been delightful. It's everything I hoped and even more. So
thank you, Michael. Me too.
Good. Thank you. Okay. So here's some of the standard questions we always ask. What's your biggest obstacle in getting the double win at this point in your life?
Yeah. The biggest obstacle for me in getting the double win is pretty ironic, which is that the double win is work and life. And the truth is you shouldn't have to worry about work-life balance, because that suggests that work and life are different, and your work should be part of your life. But that means that your work is not your whole life. You actually need a seamlessness between the different parts of your life, your relationships and your work, and it should all weave together and do that really, really well. For me, my work is so consuming that without paying attention to it, I start doing it to the exclusion of other things, because I only have 24 hours in a day. And so the main barrier to me is that I'm talking to people about strivers having a balanced life, and I'm doing it so much that I'm a striver without a balanced life.
Yeah, I get it. I struggle with that same thing, and it's exacerbated by the fact that I can see that the runway is shorter now.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff I want to learn and so many different ways I want to contribute. But okay, another question. How do you personally know when you're getting the double win? What are some of the clues?
I'm happier, number one, right? I'm sleeping. And the big one is that the people that I love are happier. Because what's the double win? What I'm doing and who I love. Yep. That's really what it comes down to. The big win of life is love for the people in your life. And if you're crowding that out by working for things that are largely inanimate and rewarding mostly to you, then the people around you who you love and they love you, they're going to be less happy, and you're going to know it. The best barometer for everybody listening to us and watching us who's married, how happy is your spouse with your work-life balance?
Great question. I don't think we've ever had anybody ask that, but it's a great, great one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, what's one ritual or routine that helps you do what you do?
Yeah. So I'm super routinized and super disciplined. So I have a certain routine that I do every day. I wake up at 4:30. I work out from 4:45 to 5:45. I go to mass from 6:30 to 7. Then I have coffee and I work, and I've been able to optimize the flow of dopamine into my prefrontal cortex to give me maximum and time for creative product. But it's not just biochemistry that I'm talking about here. The main thing that I've been able to do to optimize the double win in my life is the way that I have put worship into my daily life. It's the most important thing that I do is I start the day exercising, but the first thing that I do outside of my house is I go to mass. I go to mass every day. every day. And I finish the evening praying my rosary. So I start and I end the day in worship, in communion with the Lord. And that has just been that it reminds me who I am.
Yeah.
I mean, because otherwise I'm just like a work machine. I'm just, or God forbid, I'm just another guy.
Yeah.
But if I can the first thing in the morning and the last thing before I go to bed at night, and by the way, I go to mass with my wife and I pray the rosary with my wife.
Beautiful.
And so because we're jointly metacognitively linking with our master to start the day and end the day. And in so doing, it's just the biggest reminder of who I actually am.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Where can people connect with you? Of course, we're recommending the books. All that'll be on the show notes. And we talked about them in the introduction. We'll talk about them at the end of this when Megan and I reconvene to get our biggest insights out of this. But where can people best connect with you? And what would you suggest their next step be?
I appreciate that an awful lot. I have a website the eponymous website, arthurrooks.com. And there you can actually find links to a lot of the different places where I write, speak, and teach. I have a Science of Happiness workshop, and I have all kinds of free resources, etc. But also it'll tell people how they can actually start reading my column. My Atlantic column comes out every Thursday morning called How to Build a Life. What new books are coming out, what new happiness talks and keynotes and things that I've got coming up. And that's the best way also to connect with me in case anybody wants to send me an email and tell me how they see life, which I love.
We'll have all that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Arthur, thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the work that you're doing, lifting people up and bringing them together. It's an inspiration to see, and I'm happy to be part of it today.
Thank you so much. So I know, Megan, you didn't get to participate in the conversation, but you got to hear it afterward.
Yeah.
And, so we want to talk about our takeaways. And let me go ahead and start. I think my biggest takeaway is him as a personality.
Yeah.
And I love the way that he lives his faith.
Yeah,
because,
I do too.
It's not kind of this thing that makes you feel like there's a barrier or that you're excluded, but it's very inclusive, but he's also very committed.
Yeah.
He goes to mass every morning with his wife. They say the rosary every night before they go to bed. And they're really dedicated. But at the same time, he's open to other ideas.
Yeah.
And I love that. He brings his faith into his work, but not in a heavy-handed way, but I think in a way that literally anybody can process. And that's frankly what I aspire to do in all my work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that too. And that's one of the things that I first really appreciated about him when I began reading some of his books. And I think that besides coming obviously from a place of personal conviction, which clearly it does, when he was talking about the 4 pillars of happiness, which are family, faith, friends, and work, when he's talking about that, there's really good research around the faith piece. And I think that it's an interesting angle to get into that conversation because we know in at least America and Western Europe that attendance at church and things like that is dramatically down in the last several decades, but I think in the last decade in particular. And I think it makes a good case for why we need to be pursuing those things in some way, because it's actually really important to our flourishing, our human flourishing, our happiness. It's not just like a moral question. It's so much more than that. I think we all know, like, we have a spiritual component to who we are, and that needs to be expressed. And that's really part of our happiness.
Well, one of the things he said was that, and that resonated with me, is that this idea of transcendence is a key aspect of happiness. And I like the way he said it. He said, making oneself small in relation to the universe. And he opposed that with kind of being the star of your own psychodrama.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of the problem, not a little bit of the problem, a lot of the problem with social media is that you end up being the star of your own movie and you make yourself bigger than you really are. Or a lot of people make themselves bigger than what they really are. And that kind of negates the whole idea of transcendence.
Well, and interestingly, it also negates the idea or undermines the idea of happiness, because that's a pressure on a human being that was never intended to be there. If narcissism could make you happy, for one thing, we would see a lot of happy people around because we got a lot of narcissists, I think, these days. But also the pressure of that, I think when you look at those pillars of happiness, faith, family, friends, work, Really, none of those are singular endeavors. I mean, I think that's one of my takeaways is that every single one of those is intended to be done with other people. And I'm an introvert. I love time by myself. I don't give very much time by myself, but I love it. But we're meant to live in a context, in a community, in relationship with other people. And I thought it was so interesting how he contrasted those pillars of happiness with sort of the things we think are going to make us happy, like pursuing material wealth.
Yes, I love that.
Kind of a celebrity or a public recognition of who we are. And in fact, those things are just empty promises, and they don't deliver. Not in wealthy countries. I mean, certainly, I think he talks about there are gains in happiness to be made when people are living in poverty, primarily. When your basic needs aren't covered, it's kind of hard to be too happy. But anyway, I thought that was fascinating.
Well, I did too. And, he contrasted that with sort of living in this consumeristic society where we've been indoctrinated into thinking that if we get more stuff, we'll be more happy.
Yeah.
If I can just get that dream home, or I can just get that dream car, or some other gadget or whatever. And I mean, as we're recording this, I was watching the Apple event yesterday where they were introducing the new iPhone 16. And the whole way they introduced that, and I'm not blaming Apple, but it's so attractive. It's like, if you have the iPhone 16, it will solve all of your problems.
Yeah.
It will bring magic and wonder back into your world.
And it's like, what's actually going to bring magic and wonder back into your world is sitting around a fire pit, talking to your friends, or going on a walk, or watching the sunrise, or snuggling with your kids, or serving someone in need. I mean, it's just so interesting because I've really been thinking a lot about the idea of contentment and just how the stuff that we have is a burden, and by the way, I'm not a minimalist. Like, no one has ever at one time in my life accused me of being a minimalist. My husband is a minimalist, but that's not me. But there is a wisdom to that because all that stuff has to be managed, and it can be overwhelming. And happiness and freedom, I mean, they definitely go together. If you feel encumbered by your stuff, you're probably not gonna be very happy.
It's almost like a bell curve.
Yeah.
Like on one side, you have poverty.
Right.
And, I've met happy, poor people for sure, but it's mostly misery. And then you start to get a little bit of material accumulation where you have the basics met, and then you start to achieve happiness. Not a direct correlation between that and your material standing, but you got to have some basic needs met in order to be happy. And security.
Yeah.
Right. But then it's like the other side of the bell curve is you start getting so much stuff that you're spending all your time managing your stuff.
And you need people to manage the stuff.
And so then you become less happy.
Yeah.
And I've definitely met a lot of unhappy, very wealthy people.
Right.
There's not a correlation between wealth and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So your happiness is going to come as sort of a separate thing. I also like this idea, and this confirms something that I've believed for a long time, and that is happiness is a journey. It's making meaningful progress toward a significant goal. It's not the attainment of the goal that brings happiness, but it's the pursuit of that thing that brings a happiness.
It's funny because one of my big goals from this year was the renovation of our home. We discovered mold in our home in December of last year. We had to remediate that as a whole process, but then we ended up doing a pretty significant renovation. And I mean, it was so much fun to do. It was stressful being out of our house, but it was so much fun because I love design and all the aesthetics and everything like that. And I was thinking last night, I was getting ready for bed and my updated bathroom and, so much to be grateful for. And I am extremely grateful for it. But I don't know that I'm measurably happier.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about all the things in my life that I wanted at one point. And now that I have, like, am I measurably happier? And I'm thinking mostly of like material things, like a new car or moving into a better house. Like, I don't think so. Like, the truth is, I mean, they make my life better in all kinds of ways, but I don't know that I'm really happier. Like, when I feel happier is when I am doing things like last night I was doing kind of like an evening ritual that included a bunch of yoga, and had some great music on, and I felt happy after I did that. Well, that cost me zero money, and I bought zero new things to make that possible. And I just think it's so counterintuitive. It's a great reminder, and I think Arthur has just done some powerful work in helping us remember, what does it really take to be happy?
He also mentioned, because I asked him, how in the world did Harvard let you teach a course on happiness? because that seems like the soft skill among soft skills. But he said he realized that most of these kids are getting no instruction in this.
Yeah.
They're going out into the world. They think all the wrong things will bring them happiness.
Well,
And
especially at Harvard. I mean, if you think about what he says are the things that aren't going to contribute to your happiness,
Yeah,
status,
exactly.
material wealth, whatever.
And so he wanted to kind of set them up for success so they could actually, achieve some level of happiness and not have to pursue this elusive thing that they never get by pursuing the normal things that society tells us will get us there. Well, guys, let me encourage you to buy the book, Build the Life You Want, also From Strength to Strength, if you're a person of a certain age. Like, that's a great book
Like
if you're over 50.
Or even really over 40.
Did you read it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm 44, and I felt like it was absolutely relevant and changed my thinking a lot about getting older and what the challenges are, but really what some of the opportunities are. Joel, my husband, also read it and loved it.
Yeah, that whole idea between the contrast between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence, really an important distinction.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, you guys can do us a big favor, if you would, and we'd be so grateful, if you would rate the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and also write a brief review. And if you could do that, that would help us rise in the rankings and help the Double Win Show get discovered so that more people could get exposed to this idea of winning at work and succeeding at life. We'll see you next week.